dead end. The road stretched endlessly through the fog, a narrow, twisting path that seemed to vanish into the dense woods on either side. Sarah gripped the steering wheel tighter, eyes darting to the GPS on her phone. No signal the screen read. Cedar Hollow, the town she was searching for, was nowhere in sight. The deeper she drove into the fog, the heavier the sense of unease became, but she couldn't turn back now. She had come too far to stop. Sarah was chasing a story, one that had haunted Cedar Hollow for years: the disappearance of 3 hikers. Official reports blamed wild animal attacks, but whispers in the nearby towns told a different story. There were rumors of something much darker in the woods, something the townspeople were afraid to speak of. She'd been tipped off by an anonymous source, a woman who claimed to know what really happened to the hikers. Sarah had arranged to meet her tonight. As her car climbed a steep hill, the headlights caught something on the side of the road, a faded wooden sign, barely visible through the mist. Welcome to Cedar Hollow. Population 320. The letters were chipped, and something about the sign felt off. The silence here was suffocating. No houses, no lights, nothing but the oppressive weight of the fog and the looming trees. Her cabin was supposed to be on the outskirts of town, close to where the hikers had vanished. She found it a few miles down a gravel road, a small, decrepit structure nestled between the trees. It was eerily quiet, the fog swirling around her as she got out of the car. Sarah shivered, pulling her coat tighter around herself. The cold felt unnatural, as though the air itself was watching her. Inside the cabin, she unpacked quickly, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread. She had one job: find the source, gather the information, and uncover the truth about the hikers. But as night fell, the feeling of being watched only intensified. The woods seemed to press in against the windows, the fog clinging to the glass like pale, ghostly hands. Around 9 p.m., there was a knock at the door. Sarah jumped, her heart pounding. She hadn't expected her source to arrive so soon. When she opened the door, an old woman stood on the porch, her face pale and drawn, deep lines etched into her skin. "You're the reporter?" the woman asked, her voice barely a whisper. Sarah nodded. "Yes. You said you had information about the missing hikers." The woman glanced over her shoulder nervously, her breath visible in the cold air. "I shouldn't be here. They're watching. They always watch." "Who?" Sarah asked, her voice catching in her throat. The woman's fear was contagious, wrapping around Sarah like a vice. "The ones in the woods," she said, her eyes wide with terror. "They took the hikers, and they'll take you too if you get too close." Before Sarah could press her further, the woman turned and hurried into the night, disappearing into the fog. Sarah's heart raced as she closed the door, trying to make sense of the cryptic warning. She'd heard rumors about strange figures in the woods, but no one had ever given her such a direct and chilling message before. She paced the cabin, mind racing. The woods had been the last place the hikers were seen. If she wanted answers, she'd have to go there herself. Against her better judgment, Sarah grabbed her flashlight and ventured outside. The fog had thickened, turning the world around her into a swirling mass of shadows. Every step she took felt wrong, like she was crossing into a place she didn't belong. The path into the woods was narrow and overgrown, barely visible in the dim light of her flashlight. The trees towered above her, their branches twisted like skeletal arms. As she walked deeper, the fog seemed to close in, muting every sound except for the crunch of leaves beneath her boots. Then she saw something glinting in the dirt just off the path. Sarah crouched down and picked up a small silver pendant, tarnished and worn. Her heart skipped a beat when she realized what it was. She had seen a picture of this pendant before, in one of the case files. It belonged to Jessica, one of the missing hikers. Suddenly, a twig snapped behind her. Sarah whipped around, her flashlight scanning the darkness. Nothing. The woods were still again, but the sense of being watched was overwhelming. Her pulse quickened as she stood, clutching the pendant tightly in her hand. She needed to leave now. As she hurried back toward the cabin, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was following her. The fog seemed to pulse, alive with hidden movement. Every sound, every rustle of leaves, every whisper of wind set her nerves on edge. She broke into a jog, heart pounding in her ears. Just as the cabin came into view, a figure stepped out of the fog, blocking her path. He was tall and gaunt, his face partially obscured by the shadows. Sarah froze, her flashlight trembling in her hand. "You shouldn't have come here," the man said, his voice low and menacing. "This is a dead end." Sarah's mouth went dry. "Who are you? What happened to the hikers?" The man's eyes gleamed in the dark. They wandered where they didn't belong. "Just like you." Without warning, he lunged at her. Sarah turned and ran, her feet pounding against the dirt path as she raced toward the cabin. She could hear him behind her, his footsteps growing closer. The fog thickened, turning the world into a blur. Her lungs burned as she pushed herself faster, desperate to reach the safety of the cabin. She burst through the door and slammed it shut, locking it behind her. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she backed away from the door, listening for any sound outside. Silence. But the oppressive feeling of being watched hadn't left. She glanced toward the window, and her heart nearly stopped. The man was standing there just beyond the glass, his face twisted into a cruel smile. "You can't run forever," he whispered, his voice barely audible through the fog. Sarah grabbed her phone, frantically dialing 911, but there was no signal. The man outside the window didn't move, didn't blink. He just watched, as if waiting for her to make a mistake. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed from behind her. Sarah turned, and her blood ran cold. Another figure, shrouded in darkness, stood in the corner of the cabin. "You shouldn't have come," the figure said, its voice eerily calm. "There's no leaving this place. Not for you. Not for anyone." Sarah's mind raced. She was trapped, surrounded by the fog and the things that lived in it. As the shadows closed in, she realized the truth. Cedar Hollow was a dead end, not just a place on the map, but a place where people vanished, consumed by the darkness that lived in the woods. And now it had come for her too.